day in the park, I was having just a delightful picnic with my good friend Orville. And I said to him, I said, Orville, I have a story. He said to me, what's the significance of the story? I said to him, Orville, not every story has to have significance, you know? Sometimes a story is just a story. You try to read into every little thing, find meaning in everything anyone says, you'll just drive yourself crazy. I had a friend do it once. Wasn't pretty. We talked about it for years. And then not only that, but you'll likely end up believing something you shouldn't believe, thinking something you shouldn't think, or assuming something you shouldn't assume, you know? Sometimes, I said, a story is just a story. So just be quiet for 1 second of your life and eat your sandwich, okay? Of course, it was only then I realized I made sandwiches. Poor Orville was having such difficulty eating it. Elephants have those clumsy hands, you know? Actually, I suppose that's the problem. They don't have hands at all, do they? They're all feet. And I couldn't imagine someone asking me to eat a sandwich with my feet. Now, if I recall correctly, there was a bakery nearby. I said to him, Orville, let me go get you some rye bread. Now, I'm unsure if elephants enjoy rye bread, but I assure you that Orville does. Now, this was on a Tuesday, which was good because rye bread was always fresh on Tuesday. They made sourdough bread on Monday and threw it out Wednesday. Or rather, they sold it at a discount for people wanting to feed the ducks. And then probably at the end of the day, finally, they threw it all out. I don't recall. I do remember a man who would bring his son to the bakery every Wednesday and go feed the ducks. He would buy all of the sourdough bread. Of course, you know, you're not supposed to feed the ducks sourdough bread at all. It swells up in their stomach and then they all die. At least that's what I've heard. You know, I never saw any ducks die myself, but I did notice a substantial decrease in the duck population over the course of a few years. I just never thought to stop the man and tell him that he was killing the ducks by feeding them sourdough bread. And if you want my opinion on the matter, and I told Orville this as well, if you want to feed ducks, or birds, or any kind for that matter, it's best to buy seed. I mean, when you think about it, breads of any sort don't occur in nature. They don't grow on trees or spring up from the bushes. I don't think birds know what to do with bread. What was I saying? Oh, yes. So I bought Orville some rye bread. What a fine day it was. It reminds me of a time I was speaking to my good friend Orville. We were sitting on a park bench watching the pigeons. I was on the left, he was on the... Was I on the right or left? Anyways, it doesn't matter. We were sitting on there watching the pigeons. And I said to Orville, Fred, those birds are frozen. And he kind of looked at me like I lost my mind. But I reminded him that it was winter, you know, and often birds will sit in a tree until they freeze. Then they sort of fall to the ground until the sun warms up and they can, move around again. So I said to Orville, you might as well save those breadcrumbs until the birds thaw, because they can't very well enjoy them in the condition they're in. To which he asked what I meant, and asking what condition the crumbs should be in before he threw them to the birds, assuming that I meant the birds couldn't enjoy the breadcrumbs in the condition that the crumbs were in, when in fact I had meant the birds could not enjoy them in the condition that the birds were in, considering that the birds were frozen. So he took a moment and then threw his last handful onto the ground. I said to him, Orville, why did you throw the breadcrumbs to the birds when I just told you they're frozen? To which he responded, the breadcrumbs are not frozen. Again, misunderstanding my words. I didn't mean to say that the breadcrumbs were frozen when I said I told you they're frozen. I've been referring to the birds. In hindsight, what I should have said was, and this would make perfect sense, why did you throw the breadcrumbs to the birds when the birds are frozen? He misunderstood upon my correction, stating that he didn't know what else to do with the breadcrumbs, and that perhaps, when the birds thawed, they'd still be able to eat the crumbs. So I said to Orville, this is what I said to him, I said, Orville, the birds may be dead. It reminds me of a conversation I was having with one of my good friends, Orville. We were having a nice picnic one day. I believe it was summer, or perhaps it was it the fall? Yes. It was the fall because the leaves had turned already. But I said to Orville, I said, Orville, I have a story to tell you. And Orville looked at me, kind of odd and said, well, what's it about? I said to him, not every story has to be about something, Orville. Sometimes a person just wants to talk. Why does everything have to be a story? I said to him. He just looked at me and he said, well, you said you had a story. He was quite right. I did, in fact. I told him I had a story. I suppose if a person just wants to talk, then it's best to not announce that you're telling a story. Telling a story does come with its own pressures and expectations, I suppose. After all, if you're just talking to a friend, there's no more expectations than if you were talking into the wind. Words by themselves aren't expected to carry, aren't expected to stick. But if you announce you're telling a story, well then, there better be a point to it all, No one wants to sit and listen to someone ramble on and on and on with absolutely no end in sight. So, it's good to be mindful that when you tell someone that you're about to tell a story, that you have something to say. Telling someone that you're going to tell them a story is tantamount to asking them to stop what they're doing and pay attention. You're basically saying, hey buddy, stop everything, stop what you're thinking, I have a solution to everything. And well, I didn't really have any story to tell. In hindsight, I probably just misspoke when I said that I had a story. I think it would have just been better to tell Orville that I wanted to tell him something rather than tell him that I had a story. But even then, it might have put too much importance on the whole thing. Either way, it was quite a nice day. I remember that we were drinking tea. It reminds me of a time I was having a conversation with my friend Orville. We were by the river. We were sitting by the river and watching the fish leap over the falls. And I said to Orville, sometimes I feel like a fish leaping over and over again, always trying to get somewhere. I don't know where, only to find myself in the jaws of a beast. He, of course, looked at me, surprised, Have you been in the jaws of a beast, friend? To which I said, no, of course not, Orville. I said, no. I simply meant that life can seem like a relentless endeavor to overcome meaningless obstacles, only to meet an equally meaningless fate, regardless of your efforts, regardless of the obstacles you've passed. And Orville, he stood and proceeded to drape me with the picnic cloth, to which I asked him, I said, Fred, what are you doing? He looked at me very concerned, really. I feel like you've gotten too much sun. Indeed, indeed I have.